My wife turned our love into a corporate contract, and her empire of control finally collapsed when I gave her a taste of her own management game. Charts, printed documents, and a laptop displaying what appeared to be a PowerPoint slide titled Relationship Performance Review. She looked up at me with the kind of serious expression you'd expect from an HR manager about to deliver bad news. "We need to talk," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her like I was applying for a job in my own home. I sat down, genuinely curious about whatever elaborate scheme she'd cooked up this time. She'd always been dramatic, but this looked like she'd spent weeks preparing. After careful consideration and analysis, she began, reading from actual notes. "I've determined that our marriage requires immediate intervention. You're being placed on relationship probation, effective immediately." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Relationship probation?" She nodded seriously, flipping to the next page in her folder. "Yes, I've documented numerous performance issues over the past months, and traditional communication methods have proven ineffective. This is a structured 90-day improvement program." The absurdity of the moment hit me like a freight train. Here was my wife of 6 years treating our marriage like a failing employee review. She had charts showing my deficiency areas, complete with paragraphs and statistical breakdowns. "Performance issues?" I asked, maintaining my composure while internally marveling at the sheer audacity. She launched into her prepared speech. "Late arrivals home without notification, insufficient participation in household planning discussions, subpar engagement during social events with my friends, and a concerning trend of prioritizing personal interests over relationship maintenance." Each point was delivered with the cold efficiency of a corporate consultant. She had dates, times, and specific examples. According to her metrics, I was apparently failing as a husband in quantifiable ways. "The probation period will include mandatory check-ins, performance tracking, and specific behavioral objectives," she continued, sliding a printed document across the table. "Your compliance with these parameters will determine whether this relationship continues or requires alternative solutions." I picked up the document. It was 12 pages long. 12 pages of rules, expectations, and evaluation criteria for being her husband. She'd literally created a manual for how I should exist in my own marriage. "Alternative solutions?" I asked, scanning the ridiculous requirements. "Separation proceedings would become necessary if improvement targets aren't met," she replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing quarterly sales figures. The entire situation was so perfectly orchestrated, so completely thought out, that I had to admire the effort even while being appalled by the content. She turned our marriage into a performance review, complete with improvement plans and termination warnings. I set the document down and looked at her carefully. She was serious, dead serious. This wasn't some elaborate joke or emotional outburst. She genuinely believed she had the authority to put me on probation in my own marriage. "When did you prepare all this?" I asked. "I've been working on it for 3 weeks, she said proudly. "I wanted to ensure the process was fair and comprehensive." 3 weeks. She'd spent 3 weeks creating a system to manage me like an underperforming employee, and she was proud of it. The level of manipulation required to even conceive this plan was staggering. I stood up slowly, taking one more look at the elaborate presentation she'd prepared. Charts showing my relationship KPIs, spreadsheets tracking my engagement scores, and a formal timeline for my improvement journey. "This is quite impressive," I said calmly. "You've really thought of everything." She smiled, clearly pleased that I was acknowledging her effort. "I knew you'd appreciate the structured approach. We can start the program tomorrow morning." I nodded thoughtfully, my mind already working through the implications of what she'd just revealed. She'd shown me exactly who she was and how she viewed our marriage. More importantly, she'd handed me a roadmap of her own expectations and methodology. "I'll need tonight to review the documentation thoroughly," I told her, picking up the manual. "This deserves careful consideration." She looked satisfied, believing she'd successfully established control over the situation. Little did she know, she'd just given me everything I needed to turn her own game against her. I walked upstairs with her relationship probation manual, already planning my response. If she wanted to play corporate consultant with our marriage, I'd show her what a real performance management system looked like. The next morning, she was waiting for me in the kitchen with a coffee and what looked like an orientation packet. She'd actually prepared a welcome kit for my first day of relationship probation. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I've prepared your daily requirements and tracking sheets. I poured myself coffee and sat down to examine her latest creation. The packet included a schedule, daily reporting forms, and something she called a relationship success metrics dashboard. Your check-in time is 6 p.m. Sharp, she explained, pointing to the schedule. No exceptions. I need a full account of your day, including who you interacted with and how you spent your time. She handed me a form that looked like something you'd fill out for parole officers, daily activity log, mood assessment, and a section where I was supposed to rate my own relationship contribution score from 1 to 10. There's also a spending approval process, she continued, flipping to another page. Any purchases over $50 require pre-authorization. I've created a simple request form you can submit via email. I studied the form. She'd actually designed a requisition system for my own money, complete with justification fields and approval workflows. Communication guidelines are outlined on page 7, she said, clearly enjoying her role as relationship manager. Response time expectations for texts and calls, appropriate topics for discussion, and conversation quality standards. According to her rules, I had 15 minutes maximum to respond to her messages, regardless of what I was doing. Failure to meet response times would result in performance demerits. The point system works like this, she explained, producing a laminated chart. Positive behaviors earn points. Negative behaviors lose points. Your weekly score determines your relationship status and privileges. Privileges. She'd created a system where I could earn or lose privileges in my own marriage. Things like choosing what to watch on TV, deciding where to eat dinner, or spending time with my friends were now contingent on my performance scores. What happens if I don't participate in this system? I asked, genuinely curious about her contingency planning. She looked at me seriously. Non-compliance is automatic grounds for relationship termination. This program is mandatory, not optional. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She'd unilaterally decided to restructure our entire marriage around her management system, and participation wasn't even a choice. I've also scheduled weekly performance reviews, she said, pulling out a calendar marked with red appointments. Every Sunday at 10 a.m., we'll discuss your progress, areas for improvement, and adjust targets as needed. She'd blocked out 2 hours every Sunday for what she called relationship optimization sessions. The calendar showed these appointments scheduled for the entire 90-day probation period. Questions about the program can be submitted in writing, she continued. But please review the FAQ section first to avoid redundant inquiries. She'd actually created a frequently asked questions document for her relationship management system, 23 pages of anticipated concerns and her pre-written responses. One final thing, she said, producing what looked like a contract. I need your signature acknowledging receipt of these materials and agreement to program terms. She wanted me to sign a document agreeing to be managed like an employee in my own marriage. The contract included performance standards, disciplinary procedures, and grounds for termination. I read through the entire thing carefully while she waited expectantly. She'd thought of everything: lateness penalties, communication infractions, insufficient enthusiasm demerits, and something called relationship attitude violations. This is incredibly thorough, I said, setting the contract down and signing it. You've covered every possible scenario. She beamed with pride. I wanted to ensure clarity and prevent misunderstandings. Structure creates success. I looked at the elaborate system she'd created. The forms and charts and tracking mechanisms, all designed to control every aspect of my behavior. She turned our marriage into a corporate compliance program with herself as the sole authority. I'm impressed by the level of detail, I told her honestly. This must have taken considerable time and effort to develop. 3 weeks of solid work, she confirmed. But marriages require investment and strategic planning to succeed. She was standing there, proud of her achievement, completely oblivious to what she'd actually revealed about her character and intentions. She'd shown me her true nature in the most comprehensive way possible. I'll need some time to process all this information, I said, gathering up the materials. It's quite a comprehensive program. She looked pleased. Take your time, but remember, the program officially begins today, so your first daily report is due at 6 p.m. sharp. I nodded and headed upstairs with her entire relationship management system. She'd given me far more than just rules and requirements. She provided a complete blueprint of her manipulative mindset and control mechanisms. As I spread all her materials across my desk, I couldn't help but marvel at the elaborate trap she'd constructed. Unfortunately for her, she just handed the blueprints to someone who understood systems better than she did. Monday morning, I implemented her system with military precision. If she wanted corporate-level compliance, I'd deliver performance that would make Fortune 500 companies jealous. At exactly 5:58 p.m., I knocked on the door of our own living room where she'd set up what she called her management station. She looked surprised that I was 2 minutes early. "Good evening," I said formally, presenting my completed daily report form. "I'm here for my scheduled check-in." She took the form and began reviewing it. Her expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion as she read through my entries. "You documented every 15-minute interval of your day?" she asked, scanning the detailed timeline I'd created. "The form requested a full account of daily activities," I replied. I interpreted that as comprehensive documentation. My report included timestamps for everything: 6:47 a.m., brushed teeth for 3 minutes, 7:12 a.m., consumed breakfast, estimated caloric intake 420 calories, 8:15 a.m., departed for work, route optimization saved 4 minutes commute time. "This is very thorough," she said, clearly not expecting this level of detail. "I also prepared supplementary documentation," I continued, handing her a folder of supporting materials to verify the accuracy of my daily report. The folder contained receipts for every purchase, screenshots of my location data, and a detailed analysis of my productivity metrics. I treated her requirements like a forensic audit. "You tracked your conversation topics?" she asked, reading through my communication log. "Section C required documentation of all interactions," I explained. "I've categorized each conversation by duration, participants, and subject matter relevance to relationship objectives. I'd recorded every conversation, including a 3-minute exchange with the coffee shop cashier, categorized as transactional interaction, minimal relationship impact, positive tone maintained throughout." She flipped to my self-assessment scores where I'd rated myself with decimal precision. "You gave yourself a 7.3 for relationship contribution today." Based on the scoring rubric provided, I said, producing a highlighted copy of her point system. I completed 73% of available relationship-building activities. The point 3 reflects partial completion of evening engagement requirements due to this scheduled review meeting. Her confusion was growing. She'd expected resistance or half-hearted compliance, not this level of systematic execution. "I've also prepared optimization recommendations," I continued, handing her another document. "Efficiency improvements for the current tracking system. My suggestions included automated reporting tools, standardized forms, and digital dashboards for real-time performance monitoring." I'd essentially created an upgrade proposal for her relationship management system. "You want to automate the reporting process?" she asked, reading through my technical specifications. "Manual documentation is prone to errors and inefficiencies," I explained. "I've designed a digital solution that would streamline compliance and provide better analytics." I'd spent hours creating mock-ups of relationship tracking apps, complete with push notifications for check-in reminders and automated scoring algorithms. She set down my materials, looking overwhelmed. This is a lot." "Excellence requires attention to detail," I replied. "I'm committed to exceeding program expectations." The next morning, I arrived at breakfast with printed copies of my daily objectives prioritized by relationship impact scores. I'd created action items for every interaction we'd have throughout the day. "Good morning," I announced, presenting her with a meeting agenda. "I've scheduled our morning communication session for optimal efficiency." The agenda included talking points, time allocations, and success metrics for our breakfast conversation. I'd literally turned casual morning chat into a structured business meeting. "You scheduled our breakfast?" she asked, staring at the agenda. "Spontaneous interactions lack focus and measurable outcomes," I explained. "Structured communication ensures we maximize relationship value during available time windows." I prepared conversation starters categorized by emotional impact levels and engagement probability scores. Even casual topics like weather had been analyzed for relationship building potential. By Wednesday, my compliance had reached absurd levels. I was submitting reports in triplicate, creating backup documentation for everything, and treating every aspect of our marriage like a compliance audit. "You're taking this very seriously," she said during our evening check-in, reviewing my latest submission. "Program success requires total commitment," I replied. "Half measures produce suboptimal outcomes." I'd started wearing business casual clothes at home, carrying a clipboard for note-taking, and addressing her as program administrator during official interactions. "I think maybe we can relax some of the requirements," she said, looking uncomfortable with the monster she'd created. "Relaxing standards compromises program integrity," I responded. "Consistency is essential for accurate performance measurement." She was beginning to realize that getting exactly what she asked for wasn't what she actually wanted. My perfect compliance was making her system look as ridiculous as it actually was. By Thursday, she was avoiding the daily check-ins, but I continued documenting everything, creating reports whether she reviewed them or not. I'd built a comprehensive archive of my relationship performance metrics. Friday evening, she finally cracked. "This is getting out of hand," she said, looking at my latest submission. "I'm confused," I replied calmly. "My performance scores have been consistently above target. Are you dissatisfied with my compliance levels?" She couldn't complain about my behavior without admitting her system was flawed. I'd followed her rules so perfectly that the absurdity was becoming impossible to ignore. Saturday morning, I requested a formal meeting with the program administrator. She agreed, probably hoping to scale back her system before it consumed our entire existence. "I've completed my preliminary compliance period," I announced, settling into my chair with a folder twice as thick as her original packet. "Now I'd like to discuss reciprocal accountability measures." Her confident expression faltered. "Reciprocal accountability? Your system assumes unilateral performance management," I explained, opening my folder. "However, effective relationship optimization requires bilateral assessment protocols." I'd spent the week analyzing her behavior using her own criteria. Every interaction, every decision, every moment of our marriage had been documented and scored according to her standards. "I've conducted a comprehensive audit of program administrator performance," I continued, sliding my analysis across the table. "The results are concerning." Her eyes widened as she saw the scope of my documentation, charts, graphs, and statistical breakdowns of her relationship, contributions, using her own metrics. "You scored me?" she asked, flipping through pages of detailed observations. "Fairness requires consistent evaluation standards," I replied. "I applied your exact criteria to both participants in this relationship optimization program." My audit revealed fascinating patterns. According to her own system, she was failing spectacularly as a partner. Late dinner preparations, insufficient communication engagement, subpar emotional support metrics, and concerning trends in appreciation expression. "Your relationship contribution scores average 4.2 out of 10, I explained, pointing to a graph showing her weekly performance. "Well below acceptable standards by your own definitions." She stared at the numbers, unable to argue with data derived from her own methodology. I'd used her weapons against her with surgical precision. "Communication response times show chronic deficiencies," I continued, displaying a timeline of her text responses. "Average delay of 43 minutes, with several instances exceeding 2 hours. Her 15-minute response requirement had been weaponized against her own behavior. The hypocrisy was mathematically undeniable." "I've also identified concerning patterns in household contribution metrics," I said, producing spreadsheets tracking domestic responsibilities. "Distribution of labor shows significant imbalances that require immediate correction." Using her scoring system, I documented every chore, every meal, every household task. The data showed she contributed less than she demanded, creating what I termed management overhead inefficiency. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "I can't be scored like this." "These are your standards," I reminded her calmly, applied consistently and objectively to both relationship participants. I'd created performance improvement plans for her deficiencies, complete with daily objectives and tracking requirements. If she wanted corporate-style relationship management, she'd get the full corporate experience. "Your social engagement scores are particularly concerning," I continued, showing her interaction data from recent gatherings. "Insufficient attention to my professional colleagues, limited participation in conversations about my interests, and measurable lack of enthusiasm during my family events." Every criticism she'd leveled at me was now reflected back with supporting documentation. Her own system had become her judge and jury. "I've prepared a 90-day improvement program for you as well," I announced, producing another thick packet. "Reciprocal probation ensures balanced relationship optimization." Her improvement program was identical to mine in structure, but focused on her documented deficiencies: daily reporting, spending approvals, communication guidelines, and performance reviews. "You can't put me on probation," she said, her voice rising. I'm not the one with problems. The data disagrees, I replied, tapping the comprehensive analysis. Objective measurement reveals performance gaps requiring structured intervention. I'd prepared weekly goals for her attitude improvement, social engagement enhancement, and domestic contribution optimization. Everything she demanded from me was now her responsibility. I've also documented concerning trends in relationship leadership effectiveness, I continued, presenting organizational charts showing decision-making patterns. Unilateral policy implementation without stakeholder consultation indicates management competency issues. Her entire probation system was reframed as evidence of poor leadership skills and collaborative failure. The very creation of her program became proof of her relationship inadequacies. This is insane, she said, pushing the papers away. You're turning everything into a competition. I'm applying your methodology consistently, I corrected. Equal standards for equal partners in relationship optimization. She was trapped by her own logic. Rejecting my audit meant admitting her system was flawed. Accepting it meant submitting to the same control mechanism she'd imposed on me. I need time to review this, she said finally, looking overwhelmed by her own tactics used against her. Of course, I agreed. However, your reciprocal probation program begins Monday morning. Your first daily report is due at 6 p.m. sharp. I'd taken her corporate relationship model and expanded it into a bilateral performance management system. She'd created the rules, established the precedents, and provided the framework for her own evaluation. I've prepared your orientation materials, I added, handing her a welcome packet identical to the one she'd given me. Please review the guidelines carefully. Non-compliance isn't optional. She sat there staring at her own system reflected back at her, finally understanding what she'd created. The trap she'd built for me had become her prison as well. Questions about your program can be submitted in writing, I concluded, standing to leave, but please review the FAQ section first to avoid redundant inquiries. I walked away, leaving her alone with the comprehensive documentation of her own failures measured by her own standards and managed by her own system. Monday evening arrived with the precision of a corporate deadline. She'd spent the weekend clearly struggling with her new reality, but I maintained professional standards regardless of her emotional state. At exactly 6 p.m., I knocked on her management station door. Good evening, Program Administrator. I'm here to collect your first daily compliance report. She looked up from the couch where she'd been staring at her orientation packet for the past hour. I didn't complete it. Non-compliance on day 1 is concerning, I noted, making a mark on my evaluation clipboard. This will require documentation in your permanent performance file. I'd established my own management station in the spare room, complete with filing systems, performance tracking boards, and official documentation protocols. If she wanted corporate-style relationship management, she'd experience the full bureaucratic treatment. This is getting out of control, she said, gesturing at the materials surrounding her. We need to stop this. Stopping mid-program would compromise data integrity, I replied calmly. However, I am prepared to discuss alternative solutions. Her relief was visible until I pulled out another folder. I've prepared a formal relationship performance review based on collected data from both probation periods. The folder contained what I'd labeled a comprehensive partnership analysis. Months of documented interactions, behavioral patterns, and relationship contributions had been compiled into a definitive assessment. After careful evaluation of all available data, I began reading from my prepared summary. I've determined that this relationship requires fundamental restructuring or termination. She sat up straighter, suddenly realizing this wasn't about modifying her system anymore. This was about something much more serious. I've identified systemic issues that cannot be resolved through performance improvement programs, I continued, presenting charts showing declining relationship satisfaction metrics over time. My analysis revealed patterns she couldn't deny: increasing control behaviors, declining mutual respect indicators, and a fundamental misalignment of partnership values. The data painted a clear picture of relationship deterioration. Your implementation of unilateral control mechanisms demonstrates incompatibility with collaborative partnership models, I explained, showing organizational charts comparing healthy relationships with authoritarian management structures. She'd created a dictatorship and called it marriage improvement. My documentation made this undeniably clear through objective measurement and analysis. I'm hereby issuing formal notification of relationship review status, I announced, handing her an official-looking document. This partnership will undergo comprehensive evaluation over the next 30 days. The review notification outlined investigation procedures, evaluation criteria, and potential outcomes. I'd essentially put our entire marriage under corporate-style performance review. "You can't review our marriage like a business project," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "You established the precedent for systematic relationship evaluation," I reminded her. "I'm simply applying professional standards to the assessment process. My review criteria included trust metrics, respect indicators, collaborative decision-making effectiveness, and long-term compatibility projections. Every aspect of our relationship would be measured and evaluated. I've also prepared individual consultation sessions," I continued, producing a calendar of scheduled appointments. "We'll need to discuss your career development plans, personal growth objectives, and future relationship goals." The consultation sessions were designed like exit interviews. I'd created structured discussions to document her expectations, evaluate our compatibility, and assess the viability of continued partnership. "During the review period, I'll be conducting reference checks," I added, presenting a list of contacts. "Family members, friends, and colleagues will provide third-party perspectives on relationship dynamics." She looked horrified at the idea of our marriage being evaluated by outside parties, but I'd simply extended her corporate methodology to include stakeholder feedback. "I've prepared preliminary termination protocols as well," I said matter-of-factly, producing another document. "Should the review determine that partnership dissolution is optimal, the termination protocols outline asset division, responsibility transfer, and transition timelines." I'd created a business plan for ending our marriage with the same efficiency she'd applied to managing it. "You're talking about divorce like it's a corporate restructuring," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Efficient transitions minimize disruption for all parties," I replied. "Professional separation protocols ensure fair outcomes and clear expectations." I documented every aspect of our shared life, cataloged our assets, and prepared comprehensive dissolution procedures. Her corporate approach had taught me the value of thorough planning. "I don't want a divorce," she said desperately. "I just wanted you to be a better husband." "Your definition of improvement required fundamental changes to my identity and autonomy," I responded, consulting my analysis. "The data indicates irreconcilable differences in partnership philosophy. She'd wanted a compliant employee, not an equal partner. My documentation made this distinction mathematically clear." "We can work this out," she pleaded. "We can go back to normal." "Normal was what prompted your probation system," I reminded her. "You've demonstrated that standard relationship dynamics are unsatisfactory to you." Her own actions had created this situation. The extensive documentation she'd required now served as evidence of her controlling nature and manipulative tendencies. "I've scheduled our first formal review session for Thursday at 7 p.m., I concluded, gathering my materials. "Please prepare your responses to the questions outlined in Section 12 of your consultation packet." She sat there holding the official review notification, finally understanding that her corporate relationship experiment had evolved into something far beyond her control. "The 30-day evaluation period begins tomorrow," I added. "I suggest you review the assessment criteria carefully. Your future depends on demonstrating significant improvement in partnership compatibility metrics." I left her with the comprehensive review materials, knowing she'd finally realized that playing corporate games with someone who understood systems better than she did was a catastrophic mistake. 30 days later, I sat across from her at our dining table with the final review documentation spread between us. The same table where she'd first presented her relationship probation system now hosted the conclusion of her corporate marriage experiment. After comprehensive evaluation of all available data, I began reading from my prepared assessment. "I've reached a definitive conclusion regarding the viability of this partnership." She'd spent the review period trying desperately to improve her scores, submitting daily reports, and attempting to prove her value as a relationship partner. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Your performance during the evaluation period showed marginal improvement," I continued, consulting my charts. "However, fundamental compatibility issues remain unresolved." The 30-day review had documented everything: her attempts at manipulation, her inability to accept equal treatment, and her persistent belief that she deserved special consideration while holding me to impossible standards. "I'm officially terminating this relationship effective immediately," I announced, sliding a document across the table. "This notice serves as formal notification of partnership dissolution." Her face went white as she read the termination letter. I'd written it in the same corporate style she'd used for her probation system, complete with performance, justifications, and transition timelines. "You can't be serious," she whispered. But the comprehensive documentation surrounding us made my seriousness undeniable. Termination decision is based on irreconcilable differences in management philosophy and fundamental incompatibility in partnership approach, I explained, pointing to specific sections of my analysis. I'd created a detailed case study of our relationship failure, showing how her control mechanisms had systematically destroyed trust, respect, and collaborative decision-making. The evidence was overwhelming and professionally presented. "I've prepared a complete transition plan," I continued, producing another folder. "Asset division, responsibility transfer, and timeline for relationship dissolution." The transition plan was thorough and fair, but clinical in its precision. Bank accounts, household items, shared responsibilities, and living arrangements were all addressed with corporate efficiency. "I don't understand," she said, staring at the termination documentation. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling." "Counseling would require acknowledgement of mutual responsibility for relationship dysfunction," I replied. "Your consistent pattern of unilateral blame assignment indicates low probability of therapeutic success." I documented her inability to accept responsibility throughout the review period. Every attempt at discussion had resulted in her deflecting blame or minimizing her role in creating the toxic dynamic. "I've also prepared references for your future relationship endeavors," I said, handing her a sealed envelope. "Professional courtesy requires honest assessment of performance and compatibility factors." The reference letter was devastating in its professional politeness. I'd summarized her relationship management style, control tendencies, and collaborative limitations in language that would be immediately recognizable to anyone who dealt with difficult managers. "This is insane," she said, her voice breaking. "You're treating our marriage like a business deal." "You established the corporate framework," I reminded her calmly. I simply applied professional standards consistently throughout the process. She'd created this monster by treating our relationship like a performance management system. Now, she was experiencing the logical conclusion of her own methodology. "I'll contest the divorce," she threatened, but her voice lacked conviction. "All dissolution procedures are documented and legally compliant," I replied, producing another folder. "I've already consulted with legal representation and filed preliminary paperwork. My preparation was comprehensive and professionally executed. Every step had been planned, documented, and legally verified. There would be no surprises or emotional manipulation in this process." "You've changed," she said desperately. "This isn't who you are." "This is exactly who I am when treated like an employee instead of a partner," I corrected. "You created this dynamic by demanding corporate-style relationship management. I'd become the professional, efficient, emotionally detached manager she'd apparently wanted. The problem was that efficient managers make termination decisions based on data, not emotions." "I've scheduled a final transition meeting for Friday," I concluded, gathering my materials. "We'll review asset division details and establish communication protocols for the separation period." She sat there surrounded by the elaborate system she'd created, finally understanding that getting exactly what she'd asked for had destroyed everything she'd actually wanted. "Your personal belongings can remain in the house during the transition period," I added professionally. "However, I'll be relocating to alternative accommodations effective tomorrow." I'd arranged temporary housing, established separate banking, and transferred utilities with the same systematic efficiency she demanded in her relationship management system. "I want you to know," I said, standing to leave, "that your corporate relationship experiment was remarkably successful. You got exactly the kind of professional, systematic, data-driven partnership management you requested." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, finally realizing that winning her game meant losing everything that actually mattered. "The difference is," I continued, "professional managers terminate underperforming relationships instead of trying to rehabilitate them indefinitely." I walked away from the table, leaving her alone with the comprehensive documentation of her failed corporate marriage experiment. She'd wanted a systematic approach to relationship management, and I delivered exactly that. The final irony was perfect. Her demand for corporate-style relationship control had produced the most efficient termination process either of us could have imagined. Professional, thorough, and completely final. She'd played corporate consultant with our marriage, and I'd shown her what happened when someone actually qualified took over the management position. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.